We'll just bring the anecdotes, okay, guys?
Yeah.
Mainly an anecdotal conversation, not any centered in any sort of research or any sort of data. Let's keep it feelings and guts and little whispers in our ears, okay? And broken telephone. Let's keep it to that. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, virtual edition. Who do we have?
Chris O'Neill.
Robin Kroll.
Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Sounds like we're on episode 38 to 40, depending on how we're going to roll this. We don't have a real picture on that right now, but we're going to be talking about marketing funnels and having a good picture of your leads. So maybe we should have a podcast funnel, so we know what number we're on at any given moment, but that's okay. I don't think people are going to get too bent out of shape on that. Redesigning your digital marketing funnel, part 2, Kevin Butler. If you haven't read it, it's one of those viral blog articles that are going crazy on LinkedIn right now, talking about how it's trending. It is trending. We haven't put any money behind it. Nobody's read it. But we're gonna. What's that, Chris?
You're organic. It's just growing because it's being shared.
Yeah, exactly. So this is part of our series of helping companies that are probably more B2B, selling type organizations that would be relying on a lot of trade shows. We've got some good content kind of coming up around those that actually run trade shows. That's going to be one that comes out shortly. But for companies like us who would already have done a couple this year or probably 3 this year, to many that had a pretty solid schedule, we're talking about the digital marketing funnel. Those organizations may not have had as much rigor around really managing a funnel because they'd come back with leads and they would be, mainly focused on things that are kind of moving quick through the funnel. And now there's a kind of greater emphasis on that. So we want to talk about that. There is a blog. We'll link it in the description. But I think it'd be good for the audience to check out. But I think we're going to start with data and then maybe messaging, right? I think that's what we said as kind of like the 2 kind of starting points moving in. So who wants to kick this off? Kev, maybe it's your thing, and then because it's data, Robin can weigh in because she's going to be ready to pounce the moment the 4-letter word comes into play.
I'm going to try to tee you up, Robin.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I think the idea here, Mike, you're right. We've been talking about for organizations who have traditionally been heavily invested in trade shows as a means for lead generation. Like, what do you do now in this new world where events and in-person meetings just aren't really on the table as far as marketing programs? And so I think in general, you've seen quite a heavy push for webinars and other sort of promotions around how do we continue to drive engagement, virtual conferences, which we're actually going to take part in one next month, and we'll kind of do a blog about that and show our experiences. But I think it really comes down to you're either going to reallocate some of your money into things you're already doing, or allocate money towards new things and have some sort of test and learn type process. And hey, maybe there's a diamond in the rough there as far as new programs, channels, tactics, methods, etc. And so one of the things that we've been preaching is 2 things. One is it's always important to test whether we have things like trade shows and events or not. It is important to try the new things because you might just find something really great, or you might just go to places your competition aren't. And the second part of it really is going to come down to what are the foundational things that make up your program and how do you do that better? And one of our collective observations is, in light of no trade shows actually happening, people are quick to say, all right, well, you better double down on digital ad spend and webinars. And so that kind of works, except now the competition for more webinars and digital ad spend has gone through the roof. And 2, if you have leaky cracks in your foundations, then all that work might not be for much value. And so when we define, and Robin, I'll transition into you here, is when we define things like foundational elements, we're talking about website, landing pages, email, and central to all of that, of course, is your database and supporting data.
Yeah, definitely. With this proliferation now of all these digital events, or you're talking about some of the ads. What I hope we're not going to see is this back to this whole spray and pray kind of attitude, saying, you know what, I'm in panic mode right now. My funnel's dried up, so I'm going to just try and do everything and see if anybody, kind of pays attention. Let's just try to get anybody to our webinar. And, that's unfortunate if it happens, and there's no need for it to happen. One of the foundational things, as you talked about, is data. Every single company today has data. Arguably, they have too much data. And not too much data, but they have data that is not
more
even
data than
used.
they know what to
More
do
data
with,
than they
probably.
actually,
Yeah.
exactly, sorry, that's a better term. So this is the opportunity to look at the data and to really understand who is my target audience. How have they engaged with me in the past? What are their interests? Do I have the data I need to be able to personalize the way I'm communicating with them and the type of events and ads that I'm putting together, and using that data to be really, really focused on attracting the right audience, having the right conversation, because there's no point going ahead and filling up the top of your funnel with those that are going to drop out right away because they are not the right audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, in terms of the funnel design, maybe we should talk a little bit about, the audience and the data that maybe you should have or would have to support your funnel design. And Kev, I'll let you kind of kick that off and then come back to Robin and Chris. But, if you've got this data that at your fingertips, and now you're rethinking your funnel, what pieces of it do you think are worthy of sort of investigating as part of your program work and your funnel makeup?
Well, I think something we were talking about before we really kicked this podcast off is everything's sort of changed now, right? And I think we know a lot about our existing funnels and pipelines and historically how we've dealt with things, but the way in which we're bringing in leads moving forward through any program is just a little bit to a lot different than what we've been doing in the past. And I think we have to recognize that. So in absence of having an in-person meeting or even an event where we can kind of get away with asking questions and process, or having them naturally come up in conversation, now we're going to have to be more diligent about how we actually go about understanding levels of qualification, understanding levels of engagement. And you just don't have that, can look someone in the eye and just get a sense as to where they're really at. So the fundamentals certainly come back to play here as far as how are we actually evaluating whether this lead is, one, qualified to fit into what we call a marketing qualified lead, or a wheelhouse lead, as I was calling it in the blog, and two, if it's ready for sales engagement. Because I think we talk about this a lot with our clients and our prospects, but it's one thing for a lead to fit the sort of bullseye criteria of what kinds of organizations we historically sell to, but it's another for them to be ready to actually be sold too. So there's, that's why there's the difference between marketing qualified and sales qualified, but really asking those questions and making sure there's even like the basic questions, like, is there an active project? Is there a budget for said project? Is there a timeline established? I think sometimes we glance over those, especially when you're in person. And now, because we don't have that, at best we have Zooms and WebExes. We really got to stay clear on what those fundamental questions would be and how we evaluate whether something's actually fit to be sold for versus fit to be in a pipeline. Okay,
so maybe I'll let Chris weigh in on this a bit, because I suspect this is also something that he sees every day. That criteria might change.
Exactly. So the questions have actually changed. So we talk to customers, some, sort of having larger ticket items, a leading CMS provider out there with whom we do business. We were talking to them earlier this week about what's happened in their funnel. And what's happened is that, because it's a large ticket item, those that were at the bottom of the funnel, like ready to go, they're secure. They're ready to go. But the middle and top of funnel has, not disappeared, but it's basically changed. Having sort of, having had a process by which you could predict sort of the way that a prospect would flow through the funnel, that's no longer sort of, we can't count on that progression anymore the way that we did before this pandemic sort of occurred. Everything's sort of changing on almost a daily basis. So being able to have an ability to move to, first of all, have that sort of knowledge of the funnel, that's great. Having that ability to sort of see what's happening at the top, middle, and bottom of funnel, then having a plan to how to move those through. For some, they've sort of relied on almost a natural progression of sort of things that would work. Now that's all, that's all changed. So the things that were expected to close, through that sort of pre-pandemic, that's no longer the case. So going back to what is it that you do when they're at the top and at the middle of the funnel, that is sort of the job of the marketers now, to figure out what is it that we need to do in order to move them in this sort of post pandemic.
Well, that's kind of where I was going, like in the piece that we published recently, is this like sort of really simple funnel, and you can make it more complicated and add various steps, and maybe some organizations should, but at a high level, what we've got is a 3-stage funnel of acquisition. So that's the actual generation of the lead. Where did it come from and how do we get it? There's the nurture, and then there's the qualification. And so in some cases, you'll generate a lead, and maybe you can really dial in the audience on a LinkedIn, and anyone that comes in through that channel and that program is pretty much going to be exactly the kind of organization you seek to speak with. So maybe you can just streamline that right into qualification, and that sort of nurture step in between that isn't necessary. But in some cases, maybe it's starting off as simple in that nurture stage. It's just sending, 3 or 4 emails as part of a actual sequence. And we're trying to really use those emails as a means to separate and identify the leads in there that are engaged and the leads that aren't. And that's how we're going to go and focus marketing, to go in and say, which one of these meet the qualification criteria, which one of them are acceptable to be put into the calendars of our sales team, and which ones require just a bit more time and nurturing. And so it can be really complicated. And we talked to our clients a lot about this, but it's like, even just getting out of the gate with a simple 3-stage process and maybe 3 or 4 emails as part of a nurture campaign, even that will tell you a lot about your audience, who's engaged, who isn't. And it's okay if there's a decent chunk of those leads that aren't engaged. The more important piece is, 1, do we have some leads that are engaged and we can pull to that next stage of our sort of end-to-end funnel? And 2, are we learning how to actually build the mechanics and process around doing this? Because once we do that, then we can optimize and get better and better. But that's really the first stage here. And we don't have these events. We don't have other in-person type activities that we can do. So in lieu of that, we're going to have slightly more sophistication in how we actually nurture these things through probably.
Well, I think, maybe I'll turn this over to you, Robin, to talk about messaging for a little bit, because I know you're, part of what you're doing for some clients right now is sizing up new markets and how they can actually enter those markets with their products. And I think when you consider your messaging strategies right now for your top of funnel, middle funnel, as you described it there, Kev, there's obviously some organizations that have a product that and a need that might actually accelerate through the funnel. There might be situations where you're a provider of maybe software or certain type of digital services or what have you, that has become an increasingly in demand through this process. So the there's a messaging framework that probably is a little, you can kind of understand that better, because it's like, oh, well, we used to have a longer sales cycle, and we would say these things and pretty much say the same things, maybe with a slight tweak, and they're just moving faster through the funnel. I think, well, maybe the one that you could talk a bit to, Robin, and we could just go around for a bit on, is when that's not going to be the case. When you are going to have protracted deal lengths because of a variety of reasons, but these individual companies might actually be in MQLs. They, in fact, they may even meet some sort of SQL requirement, like this is a project, it is, something that we're going to look at in Q4 or Q1. So now let's talk about, messaging around that when you go. So why don't you take that on, Robin, and then we'll go around a bit on that.
Sure. And I think the first part of the messaging is really about the listening. So, Chris, one of the things that you said is that businesses, they're changing right now. So what might have been a priority 2 months ago, the priority is shifted because their business has changed. So being able to listen to that, because the benefit you can provide to them or the product that they're looking for might have shifted. And so that's important to integrate that into the messaging. And then the listening as the customers are going through your funnel, at every different stage, as they're digesting or as they're not digesting your marketing material, that also is giving you guidelines of what they're interested in and at what speed. So once you're listening to that, you can use all that data to actually create that messaging that you're talking about, Mike. And that messaging then is a lot more aligned to what is the benefit you can actually deliver to them at this point, and then a little bit further down the road, and making sure that that messaging is really addressing or little tidbits of what is important for them to know or to digest at this point, so then they can move on to that next level. So if it's specific about the product as well as their industry, so they're understanding, oh yeah, this is really relevant to me, so they're going to move on to that next level. And with the messaging, we should also be thinking about different channels. So we know person to person, that channel is off the table for right now. But there's still a whole mix of digital channels. There's some direct mail that's actually coming back in as a really important messaging channel with amazing capabilities to drive really personalized and targeted types of collateral. And so that should all be thought of within the whole messaging framework.
So I'm going to ask, I'll go to Chris, and then I want Kev to maybe talk about this concept. Chris, I'd like you to talk about if you are generating SQLs or MQLs, like you may not have had say the rigor of a digital funnel, but you were generating them off an event, and essentially the sales team's just calling everybody. I want to talk a little bit about if their deals are not going to move as fast, what are the types of things that we can now do from a sales perspective to also provide some intelligence?
So yeah, the one thing that, getting back to the absolute basic of having a system that can actually, deliver personalized messages is like so huge right now. So if somebody was thinking to themselves, why would I sort of invest on top of my CRM into a marketing automation platform? The answer is it's not because it's going to sort of drive like that specific ROI, although it can. The main reason is to be able to have a system that's able to deliver those personalized messages. So getting on top of what Robin was saying a moment ago, one of the things about having one of these systems and being able to sort of dissect what it is that that how a customer is interacting is to sort of deliver that individual and personalized message, which is what drives that engagement and drives that conversation. So yeah, that's how I would say, as opposed to just blasting into a list, which again we've proven time and time again, there is a time for sales to reach out. It is not when somebody has registered for
opened an email. Yeah, opened an email.
Registered.
But if you do call, I think that, there's a unique opportunity to sort of, I think part of the article that you said, Kev, is, having these standard qualifications or these standard steps that we might be following when it does get to the point where sales gets on the phone with an SQL. I think nowadays that conversation has changed. So what are the types of things that you would suss out, Chris, from your perspective, where you're like, hey, I don't want to move this out of SQL. It's still a valid SQL, but this is going to be an extended period of time now where sales can actually be part of that frontline intelligence.
Yeah. So yeah, for sure. If you're talking to a customer who does fall into that category of, let's not forget about the fact that somebody that was in the middle, or like at that SQL stage where they are definitely, they had a timeline, they had a budget, and that's basically being pushed. Just having that ability to continue to keep in touch with that customer and sort of give the message that, hey, so we appreciate that this is something that has sort of made an adjustment to the budgets. It's made an adjustment to what it is that you're doing, to be able to sort of let them know that we will be here if things are when things get back to normal, or when things turn back around. We're going to be here and ready for you.
So Kat, for marketing teams that are charged with having a marketing funnel / sales funnel that they're really driving a large part of that, certainly well into SQLs. Is it fair to say that marketing almost needs to kind of rethink their own parameters on when they would, return to nurture, when they would declassify an MQL?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just like a few things here, and I think like this can really be, these sort of ideas can be born out of marketing, maybe product marketing to get specific, but Rob and Chris, you both have said it, is like things have changed like indefinitely, whether it's like forever or for a foreseeable period of time. And so the needs of businesses have changed. In some cases, those have altered only slightly. And in other cases, like entire businesses have changed given what's going on around us. But for active projects, I would say, active deals that were going on prior to COVID really kicking up, I think the question, if I were the sales rep, I'd be asking is, does the need you have before still exist? Because maybe it comes down to positioning and better understanding what the new needs are relative to the old ones, because they might still need that, I don't know, that widget X, but we may have to frame it in a different light to say what it now solves and what it stands for in the new world with sort of these new realities upon us. And going back to product marketing, I think maybe that's partly how we change the messaging on programs and campaigns to better talk to and pivot to these new realities that do truthfully fit what the product, service, or solution stands for. But then from there, that might change some of the qualification questions that we ask, and that will dictate whether things return to nurture or not. So I think there's got to be some sort of flexibility in the sales cycle that both marketing and sales own to say, is this a good lead for now? Okay, we sell it to organizations that have X number of employees and drive Y in terms of revenue per year, but maybe there's a bit more to it now. Maybe there's other sort of criteria we need to create in the short term that we can be asking. And one thing, like as a side note, I'm really like a big believer in this. I don't see people do this enough in marketing, is when you go and you drive a new lead, you acquire them, you have them fill out a form. It's usually 5 to 7 fields, including first name, last name, industry, etc. You can always have more fields later on in forms of progressive profiling, etc. And so maybe what we can do is use our existing database to better understand new things. Maybe it's, I don't know, recent challenges, operational challenges or needs, and try to get into what those new qualification criteria are asking. And we'll try to incentivize, if we have to, some way with our existing database to try to pick out who might have needs we can solve for in this sort of messaging marketing pivot.
Okay. So I know we're coming up on probably getting close to time. But I think it's one of the things I was thinking about when you guys were talking about kind of the messaging pivots and having deals in the pipeline potentially longer than before, depending on your industry. So it makes me think, maybe this is an opportunity for marketing to your point, like have more intelligence on the existing base that we have, but actually have a larger pipeline than before. I know that many marketing teams would, qualify out after a certain period of time of minimal activity. They may not reach a score to pass it to SQL, but it's been kind of clipping along, and that score might reset in 60 days, depending on the volumes that they surface as a business. And maybe what we find is that if it's quality and there's ways for marketing to sort of deploy programs and look at engagement, that they actually maintain those leads and maintain those states for longer than they had. And then as we start to resume to some level of normality for their business, they've got a lot more to work with than they may have otherwise before. So there's something there.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm wondering, just on that point, Mike, some of the leads that might have qualified out because prior to COVID-19, maybe they didn't see your widget as a priority. So now we know that there are a lot of things, especially in the digital space, that have become priorities. So their whole need could have changed.
Yeah, I love the call out for product marketing. I think that was big. We didn't have that kind of on the list. We had messaging, as a concept, but yeah, I think this is a pretty significant exercise, actually, depending on your industry and exactly where you are, to have a product marketing function that pivots into the lens that is relevant to your audience and your different use cases, and that have now come up in a truthful way, to your point, Kev, not just making things up from a marketing perspective, but there may be things now that you never thought of before that are very relevant, and you need to go back to product marketing to suss that out and start the process from beginning to end.
Well, here's like a textbook example. It's not our industry, but it's one that's extremely prominent right now, is web conferencing, right? So let's say, I'm sort of time stamping this podcast, but say 2 or 3 months ago, WebEx had a role in business, and then all of a sudden social distancing and COVID hits, and it's like it becomes the way in which we're meeting from now on. And so it was all about sort of continue business as usual by being responsible and proper social distancing observations being made. And then all of a sudden security comes into an issue because it turns out there's some flaws and some potential gaps people can jump in, and all of a sudden security is an issue. And so then what happens is now they're positioning sort of a combination of, it's a secure web chat. Here's some of like the security features we've recently added. In Zoom's case, they've gone and hired a true CSIO from like Facebook background and stuff like that, who really knows what he's doing in this enterprise kind of BSC space. And so it's like, that's part of it. These are the adjustments they've made to address potential gaps before, and it's still helping you with remote working, blah, 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 blah. So like there's been an evolution and sort of near real-time pivoting going on in that kind of, solution sales cycle that we're seeing. And I think a lot of businesses are seeing maybe not as dramatic shifts as sort of web conferencing, but that's the pivot that's going on. So maybe like the same kinds of opportunities are available for sales, but it's about tweaking the message and relying on other values as part of the solution to move the lead through the sales stages in order to actually sell them.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think that we'll wrap it up here, and we'll be back for another one in probably a couple weeks when you publish your next series there, Kev.
Yep. I think the final one. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks. Peace.
Bye.